guys, Ellen Munsley here today. We're going to be talking about Thomas Jefferson. So, Thomas Jefferson told you what you should value in his life and the things that we should talk about. As his epitaph on his gravestone, he says, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia." Those are his, according to himself, three most important accomplishments. Who is Thomas Jefferson, though? He was born April 13th, 1743, on a plantation in Virginia. His dad was Peter Jefferson, who was a surveyor and a planter, and his mom was Jane Randolph, who was a very prominent Virginian daughter from a very strong family. He inherited his home at age 14 when his father had died, but he always had a dream of building a mountain plantation that would end up being Monticello. He married Martha Wales Skelton, and with her he would have 6 kids. Unfortunately, only 2 of them would live to see adulthood. She would also die 10 years later, so kind of tragic in terms of his family life. He would attend the College of William and Mary, and some of his notable accomplishments that he didn't actually write in his epitaph were the Summary Review of Rights of British America. He also, as president, would be the main person in the Louisiana Purchase territory in 1803. He also funded the Lewis and Clark Expedition, which is one of the most famous that we ever hear about. And then in 1796, he would be the VP to John Adams, and then in 1800, he would be the president, and it would be the first peaceful power transition between parties, which in the history of democracy, and especially in young democracies, peaceful power transition is one of the hardest things to achieve. And stability is just not one of those things that is oftentimes seen in very young democracies. But let's talk about what he did himself and what he thinks is important. Obviously, he talks about the Declaration of Independence, and in the Declaration of Independence, he has these sweeping statements about equality, about certain rights that we have that are given to us by a creator, that are given to us by God, that should be respected as a result of that. He clearly outlines why, as a nation, we have to break the bonds that we had previously had with Great Britain, and pretty much gives the backbone for why this revolution was both necessary and justified. But one of the reasons why, in recent history, we found Thomas Jefferson to be such an interesting character is obviously because the Declaration of Independence says one thing, and his life in terms of equality says another. Obviously, Thomas Jefferson was a plantation owner. He was a Virginian. He, at any given time, would have around 200 slaves under his overseeing, essentially. Of these slaves, 80 of them would probably be 16 and under, so he also had a lot of very, very young slaves. And he was a slave owner his entire life. He inherited slaves from his father, and he also bought and sold slaves himself. So it's not like he just had slaves that were inherited and that he freed them or something like that. He bought and sold slaves his entire life. Interestingly enough, though, he also had children by slaves. Sally Hemings would actually bear him 6 children. Those were the only slaves he freed were actually Hemings. So he freed his own children, and then through some sordid history with his father-in-law and children that he had by another Hemings woman, he would free some of those people as well. But they would be the only slaves he would actually free. Interestingly enough, though, he obviously understood equality and wrote some of the most strongly worded statements about equality and about slavery in the United States. In his notes on the state of Virginia, which is something that authors oftentimes point to, is actually how Thomas Jefferson felt about slavery. He says about slavery, "And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever, that considering numbers, nature, and natural means, only revolution of the wheel of fortune, an exchange of situation is among possible events, that it may become probable by supernatural interference. The Almighty has no attribute which can take sides with us in such a contest." So he clearly states there that he views slavery as almost unnatural to the foundation of America. He pretty clearly states that it's difficult to view liberty as being secure at the point where something so unique actually violates it. So in some ways, it actually seems that he was very abhorrently against slavery. but he never actually took any steps in his own life other than writing about it to actually free slaves. He would found the University of Virginia, and obviously the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom is one of the first documents we really have about separation of church and state, and also the right to practice religion openly and freely in a civil society. One of his final statements on this great experiment that is American democracy is, "I have no fear the results of our experiment will be that man can be trusted to govern themselves." He would die, ironically, July 4th, 1826, just before his friend John Adams. A life given in service to his nation, and whether or not he abided by all of the beliefs that he had, at the end of the day, he becomes the backbone of actually civil rights and a lot of our movements towards freedom and equality in reality. So Thomas Jefferson is certainly an interesting character, but we can't admonish him for the way that his life was lived in a period where that was the norm and accepted. Thanks. I hope this was interesting and informative. Have a good rest of your day.